Okay.
But no, I wouldn't say history overwhelms me. Other things overwhelm me, but not history, no. Because I think if you're not careful, history can be a real weight and an anchor around you.
The monarchy had survived scandals, silence, exile, and grief. But this was different. When Prince William confirmed that Catherine would become the sole keeper of the Queen's private letters, the palace did not simply react. It trembled. Because these were not ordinary papers. They were the final private words of a monarch, the hidden emotional map of a reign. And suddenly, only one woman held the key. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. William stood before Catherine with the weight of history pressing against every word he chose. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The prince formally confirmed that she would become the sole keeper, meaning the only person allowed to guard, approve access to, and protect the Queen's private letters from shared family handling. Those letters were not routine royal notes. They were personal writings, private correspondence that carried memories, warnings, regrets, and final thoughts never meant for ordinary eyes. Catherine understood it at once, and that understanding changed her face before she ever touched the sealed archive case. Catherine reached for it slowly, as though one wrong movement could wake every ghost inside the palace walls. William watched her hands, calm on the surface, but burdened by what this confirmation would do beyond the room. To some, it would look like trust. To others, rejection. The future king knew the difference would not matter once word spread through the household. Catherine was being placed closer to the late monarch's inner truth than anyone else, and that kind of honor always comes with a blade hidden beneath it. A senior courtier standing nearby saw the room shift the moment Catherine's fingers rested on the case. The courtier had witnessed royal announcements before, but this felt heavier, almost dangerous. The Queen, even in death, had made a choice that reached past rank and comfort. The monarch's instruction named Catherine not only as a trusted reader, but as the protector of letters tied to the future of the crown, which meant the institution's next chapter, its survival, and the emotional discipline required to carry it forward. William finally revealed how the instruction had surfaced, in a documented private account preserved with the archive papers, sealed under the Queen's own direction, and opened only after the appointed review. Catherine listened without interrupting, but her silence carried shock, pride, and fear all at once. Then came the absence no one could ignore. Camilla was not in the room. The Queen Consort had not been called, not consulted, not included. And because Camilla was absent, the silence around her became louder than any protest. The closed door changed everything. Camilla's exclusion was not just a missing chair, it was the first crack in the palace circle. And before anyone could understand why Catherine had been chosen, everyone would have to face the painful truth of who had been left outside. Every royal decision has faces behind it. Not just titles, not just protocol, faces. William carried the weight of a future king. Catherine held the burden of a woman trusted by a monarch beyond the grave. Charles stood between memory and duty. Camilla felt the door closing before anyone said it aloud. And somewhere inside the palace, old loyalties began turning into wounds. William knew this confirmation would not stay inside one room. The prince had spoken as heir, but he had also spoken as a son, still living under the shadow of his grandmother's final wishes. The Queen's private letters were not simple family notes. They were personal writings, kept away from public life, because they carried feelings, warnings, memories, and truths that could damage trust if handled carelessly. Catherine understood that meaning without needing it explained twice. She was not being handed a prize. She was being given a burden that could turn love into suspicion. Catherine stood at the center of it all, quiet but shaken. She did not reach for power. She did not look triumphant. She looked like someone who had just been trusted with a secret too heavy for one heart. William glanced at her only once, but that look said everything. The future king knew this honor would bring pressure, and she knew that pressure would not come from strangers first. It would come from family. It would come from people who believed they had been pushed away from the Queen's memory. Charles read the instruction twice. The king did not speak after the first reading, and he spoke even less after the second. An instruction, in plain terms, is a written direction left by someone with authority, and this one carried the emotional force of the late monarch's final judgment. Charles set the file down slowly, as if the paper itself had become too heavy. He loved his mother's memory. He also understood what it meant for Camilla. The queen consort had not only been excluded from access, she had been placed outside a circle Catherine had now entered. Camilla felt the wound before anyone named it. She was personally shaken, because Catherine now stood closer to the Queen's private legacy than anyone in the current household. The Queen consort had rank, position, and presence, yet none of that had opened this door. Catherine had trust, and in that moment, trust looked stronger than title. William could feel the tension building, and Catherine could feel it too, because both understood that silence often cuts deeper than accusation. Then an aide revealed, through a documented archive note attached to the file, that certain letters had been marked with names, dates, and strict instructions for when they could be opened. William's expression hardened when one name appeared on the restricted list. Catherine saw the change instantly. This was no longer just about family sentiment or private grief. Something inside those letters had been timed, sealed, and protected for a reason. And the deeper she looked into their history, the clearer it became that this decision had not begun with William at all. The palace wanted people to believe this decision had arrived suddenly. It had not. It began on one cold evening, long before the announcement, when Queen Elizabeth watched a private family argument unfold after a memorial service, and saw something she could never forget. That night became the hidden trigger. That night changed the destiny of the letters. That night made Catherine the only choice. Queen Elizabeth heard the tension before anyone dared name it. After a private memorial dinner at Windsor, the room shifted from grief into control, from remembrance into quiet competition. Windsor, one of the monarchy's most important royal residences, had always carried the weight of family history, but that evening it carried something sharper. The conversation turned to who should control the monarch's personal writings after her passing, and the Queen saw faces change. She saw people stop speaking like family and start thinking like claimants. That mattered, because those letters were not just paper. They held private judgment, emotional memory, and the kind of truth that could either protect the crown or poison it. Catherine remained still while the argument tightened around her. She did not reach for attention, and she did not defend herself with grand words. The princess simply protected the dignity of the moment, allowing silence to do what pride could not. Queen Elizabeth noticed. She saw Catherine choose restraint, while others weighed influence and access. William felt anger rising beside her, but she touched his arm gently, warning him without a word not to turn grief into battle. The prince understood the signal, and the queen understood it even more deeply. In that small gesture, Catherine showed the monarch exactly what kind of keeper she would be. Camilla appeared wounded as the discussion unfolded. The queen consort believed her position should naturally include access to the queen's private reflections, and that belief made her pain visible. She did not see herself as an outsider. She saw herself as part of the crown's present life, and being questioned around its private memory cut deeply. Queen Elizabeth watched Camilla absorb the slight, but she also watched how quickly emotion became expectation. That mattered because royal rank can open doors, but private trust is different. The monarch knew the letters would need someone who could carry hurt without turning it into revenge. Queen Elizabeth later asked for Catherine alone, and the quiet conversation that followed became the true point of no return. A private instruction, meaning a written command, meant to guide what happens after someone's death, began taking shape in the monarch's mind that night. Through a documented account, preserved with the archive papers, The Queen later revealed how she had tested Catherine's judgment in that conversation. She asked what should happen to words written in pain. Catherine answered that some truths should be guarded before they are ever shared. That answer stayed with the Queen. The monarch began drafting the instruction after the Windsor dinner, separating emotional trust from royal rank. One letter written that same night would later become the most painful document Catherine ever had to read. And what started as a private wound inside Windsor was now about to explode into a confrontation no one could soften. The palace can hide many things behind polished doors, but it cannot hide a confrontation once pride is wounded. When Camilla finally faced William and Catherine, there were no speeches, no cameras, and no room for royal performance. A chair scraped against the floor. A file remained unopened on the table. And for the first time, the Queen's letters became more than memory. They became power. Camilla entered knowing the room had already judged her absence. The Queen consort looked first at William, then at Catherine, and neither of them moved toward comfort. William stood firm, because the Queen's instruction was final, and he knew one soft word could be mistaken for doubt. An instruction, in plain terms, is a written direction left by someone with authority. And this one carried the late monarch's private will with it. Catherine stayed silent beside him, but her face carried the strain of being placed between duty and family blood. She had not asked for conflict. Yet conflict had followed the archive case into her hands. William explained the decision with careful control. The prince said the letters would remain under Catherine's guardianship because that was what the Queen had ordered, and he would not weaken those words to make the room easier. Catherine listened without interrupting, but she understood why the moment mattered. The letters were not only memories. They contained private reflections from a monarch whose judgment still shaped the crown. If the wrong person touched them for the wrong reason, the past could become a weapon. William knew that. Catherine knew it too. Camilla heard it as exclusion. Camilla finally challenged the decision, and her voice carried pain beneath the pride. She asked why she had been placed outside letters belonging to the woman whose legacy still defined the monarchy she now served. The Queen consort did not speak like someone asking for paper. She spoke like someone asking why rank had failed her. Catherine answered with quiet control, saying the role was not possession, but protection. The words landed hard. Camilla looked wounded, because Catherine had named the difference between holding something and being trusted with it. William then placed a sealed index on the table. The future king did not open it. An index, in simple words, is a list that shows what documents exist and how they are organized. And this one held names, dates, and access instructions. Camilla looked at it, then back at him, waiting for a concession. None came. William said only those named in the Queen's direction could see what the index contained. Catherine lowered her eyes for a moment, not in weakness, but because she knew the refusal had just changed the room forever. Then the revelation landed through a documented archive note attached to the file. Some letters contained the Queen's private judgments about the future conduct of the family, including warnings she had never shared while alive. Camilla understood at once why access had become so controlled. Catherine understood something worse. The Queen had expected this confrontation long before it happened. William stayed calm, but the calm itself felt like a verdict. Charles would now be forced into the storm. The king could support William publicly and wound Camilla further, or soften the blow for the Queen consort and risk appearing to challenge his mother's final wish. The confrontation did not end in that room, because behind William's calm words stood a deeper machinery of royal authority. In monarchy, power rarely arrives with noise. It comes through signatures, seals, inheritance language, private instructions, and the quiet movement of people who know exactly what must be protected. Catherine did not ask for control, yet the moment William confirmed her role, every corridor understood the same thing. The Queen's private truth now had a guardian, and that guardian answered to conscience before comfort. Charles read the directive alone, and the silence around him felt heavier than any argument. The king looked tired, not weak, but deeply worn by the knowledge that his mother had made a choice he could not easily soften. A private royal directive, in simple terms, is a written order from the monarch or royal household that explains who has authority over a sensitive matter. This one named Catherine as sole keeper, while William carried the duty of confirming and defending her appointment. Charles knew what that meant. To oppose it would not only challenge his son, it would challenge the Queen's final judgment. Catherine sat with the archive registrar and listened as every rule was explained. An archive registrar is the person responsible for tracking, protecting, and controlling access to important records. And this registrar spoke with the careful tone of someone handling history that could still wound the living. Catherine kept her hands folded tightly in her lap. She understood why the rules mattered. These letters could shape how the family remembered the Queen, and they could also expose private fears the monarch had carried in silence. Catherine was not just storing paper, she was guarding emotional evidence. William felt protective as he watched the machinery tighten around her. The prince knew Catherine would be blamed by those who could not blame the Queen. He also knew defending her would deepen cracks between Charles, Camilla, and the wider household. The future king had won the confirmation, but victory did not feel clean. It carried suffering with it. Catherine had been trusted, yes, but that trust placed her in the path of resentment. William saw that clearly, and it made his calm harder, colder, more deliberate. Camilla's name still hung over the decision, even when she was not present. The Queen Consort had already felt the pain of exclusion, and William knew that pain would now travel through private conversations, staff loyalties, and palace whispers. Charles would feel it too. The king could comfort Camilla, but he could not give her what the directive had denied. That was why the decision mattered beyond one archive case. It changed who could approach the Queen's memory, who could interpret it, and who had to stand outside it. Then the locked inventory page changed the temperature of the room. An inventory page, in plain words, is a list showing what items exist and where they are kept. But this one was sealed because it named letters reserved for future moments. Catherine saw entries marked by date, by name, and by strict opening instructions. One envelope carried both her name and William's. The prince leaned closer, but the registrar did not open it. The rule was clear. Timing mattered. The Queen had not only written to the past, she had written toward the future. Catherine finally understood the full revelation. She had not been given authority merely to store the letters. She had been given the power to decide when certain private writings could be opened. William looked at her, and she knew he understood the danger. By the next morning, the access rules would move through the palace like a cold wind. The decision would no longer be private, and the people who had lost access would begin to feel the full weight of exclusion. Royal households do not panic loudly. They change schedules. They delay meetings. They send short messages instead of long explanations. They close doors that used to remain open. By breakfast, the confirmation had already begun reshaping the palace. Catherine had not raised her voice. William had not reversed a word. But around them, loyalties were shifting like furniture before a storm. Catherine felt the change before anyone said it to her face. Palace staff had received updated access instructions stating that no private letters could be reviewed, moved, copied, or discussed without her approval. Access instructions, in simple words, are written rules explaining who is allowed to see sensitive material and who is not. These rules mattered because the Queen's private letters were no longer treated like family memories. They had become protected royal material, carrying emotional truth, future warnings, and the late monarch's final trust. Catherine understood that every approval she gave could comfort someone, wound someone, or expose something the palace had buried for years. A longtime aide stopped in the corridor after reading the memo twice. The aide had served under old systems where quiet favors, informal requests, and private family routes could open doors without leaving fingerprints. Now that network had been cut off overnight. William had made it clear that no one would challenge Catherine through staff channels. The prince's order, shared through a recorded household briefing, stated that every request must come directly and formally. That mattered because it protected Catherine from whispered pressure, but it also made her the visible wall everyone would now run into. Camilla received the news in private, and the wound landed without noise. The queen consort removed her glasses, placed them on a side table, and sat in silence after learning she could not request direct review of the queen's letters. She did not need to shout to show pain. Her stillness said enough. Camilla had already felt excluded, but this made the exclusion official. The queen consort could no longer lean on rank, closeness, or household habit. Catherine's approval stood between her and the private reflections of the woman whose legacy still shaped the throne. Charles felt trapped inside a loyalty he could not escape. The king sympathized with Camilla, but he could not break the queen's written instruction without making his mother's final judgment look negotiable. That created a heavy distance inside his household. Charles wanted peace, yet peace now required someone to surrender. If he comforted Camilla too openly, William would see hesitation. If he defended William too firmly, she would feel abandoned. The king was caught between love beside him and duty behind him. William chose firmness because softness had become dangerous. The future king knew Catherine would be blamed for rules she had not written, so he stood in front of the decision with cold control. Catherine saw what he was doing, and it hurt her, because his protection also made the divide clearer. The prince was not only defending his wife, he was defending the queen's last act of trust. Then the archive inventory revealed something wrong. One reference number was missing from the list, suggesting that a letter may have been separated before the new rules took effect. Catherine noticed it first, and her face changed. William saw the fear in her eyes before she spoke. She closed the inventory, asked him to meet her alone, and in that moment, the story stopped being about access and became about trust. There are moments when history does not roar, it whispers. Catherine and William sat alone with the archive case between them. No aides, no advisors, no palace machinery to soften what came next. She opened the marked envelope with steady hands. He watched her face change, and before a single word was spoken, William knew the queen had left them more than a duty. Catherine opened the restricted envelope slowly, and the silence seemed to tighten around her. William sat across from her, watching every small movement, every pause, every breath she tried to control. A restricted envelope, in simple terms, is a sealed document that only certain approved people are allowed to open. This one mattered because it was tied to the missing reference number that had frightened her earlier. If the letter had truly been separated on purpose, then the queen had not only planned the guardianship, she had planned a test. Catherine began reading, and the strength in her face started to break. The letter had been written after the Windsor Memorial Dinner, the same night when the queen saw family grief turn into a quiet fight over influence and access. William saw sadness move through Catherine before she said a word. The prince asked what it said, but she did not answer at once. She kept reading, as if stopping too soon would dishonor the woman who had trusted her. Catherine had carried public pressure before, but this was different. This was private trust reaching out from beyond the grave. William waited, and the waiting hurt him. The future king had defended the decision with firmness, but now he understood the emotional cost behind it. The queen had not simply chosen Catherine because she was loyal. The monarch had chosen her because she believed Catherine would protect the crown's emotional truth without using it to punish anyone. That mattered because those letters could destroy reputations if opened with anger. They could divide the family if used as proof. Catherine was being asked to hold truth without turning it into revenge. Catherine finally told William what the letter revealed. Through the queen's documented private words, preserved in her own hand, the monarch had explained that the keeper must be someone who understood silence, mercy, and timing. The Queen wrote that pain inside a family should not be exposed just because it exists. William lowered his gaze, moved by the trust, but wounded by the meaning behind it. His grandmother had seen the fracture coming. She had watched the family moving toward suspicion long before anyone dared admit it. Then, Catherine found the answer to the missing reference. It was not missing at all. It had been intentionally separated, placed apart from the main inventory, to prove whether the keeper would notice the gap before seeking power over the contents. Catherine understood the test immediately, and William understood it too. The Queen had measured not curiosity, but restraint. She had wanted to know whether the guardian would rush to open what was hidden or pause to protect what was sealed. Catherine closed the letter with visible sadness, but something inside her had settled. She now understood that her role was not to expose the family, not to win against Camilla, not to strengthen William through secrets. Her role was to preserve the line between truth and revenge. William reached for her hand, and this time neither of them needed to speak. But while they reached a private understanding, outside the palace walls, the world was already turning the decision into a national drama. By dawn, the private decision had become a public earthquake. Britain woke to a monarchy suddenly defined by one image: Catherine standing at the center of the late Queen's memory, while others were left beyond the locked door. The palace could manage statements. It could manage silence. But it could not control what the country felt when the headlines turned Catherine's quiet duty into a symbol. Catherine saw the front page before she heard the full noise outside. The headline was brutal in its simplicity. Catherine holds the Queen's final words. Beneath it sat the image of sealed royal correspondence, a phrase meaning private letters exchanged or preserved by members of the royal family. The words mattered because they turned a guarded family decision into a national judgment. This was no longer just about who could open envelopes. It was about who the public believed had inherited the Queen's moral trust. Catherine felt uneasy, not proud, because symbols can lift a person one moment and crush them the next. William watched her absorb it and understood the danger at once. The prince had confirmed the decision to protect the Queen's instruction, but the country had turned it into something larger. A major morning broadcaster framed the story as a defining transfer of emotional authority from the late Queen to the future Queen, explaining that emotional authority meant the public belief that someone carries the spirit, restraint, and values of the monarchy. William reassured Catherine that silence could still be strength. She wanted to believe him, but she knew silence had already become its own headline. Crowds gathered outside Buckingham Palace, and the mood shifted from curiosity to emotion. Buckingham Palace, the monarch's official London residence and one of the clearest public symbols of the crown, became the place where people tried to understand what had happened. One woman near the gates was heard saying in a recorded broadcast clip, "If the Queen trusted Catherine, that tells us everything." The sentence spread quickly because it gave the public a simple answer to a painful family question. Catherine was not only being seen as trusted, she was being seen as chosen. Camilla felt the reaction like a second exclusion. The Queen consort had already suffered privately, but public commentary made the wound sharper. Commentators described the decision as a vote of trust in Catherine's character, and each repetition made Camilla seem further from the Queen's private legacy. She understood what the public was hearing. Catherine had dignity. Catherine had restraint. Catherine had the letters. Camilla had rank, but rank was not enough to win the emotional argument. William saw how quickly admiration could become pressure. The future king knew the public revelation mattered because it hardened the palace decision into something almost impossible to reverse. If Charles softened the rules now, the country would read it as betrayal. If Camilla challenged them, the public would read it as resentment. Catherine was trapped by praise as much as by duty, and William knew that made her role even heavier. Then the deeper revelation settled across the country. This was not just about letters. It was about who carried the moral inheritance of the monarchy, the private standard of restraint the Queen had left behind. Catherine had become the living face of that inheritance, while Camilla stood outside its locked circle. And when the noise finally faded, the monarchy was left with one final question it could no longer avoid. What had the Queen truly chosen? In the end, the decision did not crown Catherine with power. It burdened her with trust. William confirmed the role, but the meaning came from the Queen herself. Charles accepted it. Camilla endured it. The palace absorbed it. And Catherine, standing quietly at the center of a storm she never asked for, became the keeper not of secrets, but of the monarchy's conscience. Charles gave his final acceptance with a silence that said more than any statement. The king signed the internal confirmation, then placed the pen down slowly, as though the smallest sound could disturb the weight of what had just become final. An internal confirmation, in simple words, is an official palace record showing that a decision has been accepted and will now stand. This mattered because it ended the struggle inside the household. No more soft challenges, no more private roots, no more waiting for the decision to weaken. The Queen's instruction would remain untouched, and Charles had chosen to honor his mother even when that choice brought pain into his own home. William turned to Catherine, knowing the victory felt nothing like triumph. The prince told her the letters were hers to protect, not because she stood above the family, but because the Queen believed she would never exploit its pain. Catherine listened with quiet resolve, and the future king saw that she understood the cost. Guardianship, meaning the duty to protect something valuable for others, did not mean control for pride. It meant restraint. It meant mercy. It meant knowing when truth should speak, and when silence should carry it safely. Catherine accepted the role without celebration. The princess knew the letters could become weapons in the wrong hands, but she also knew they were never meant to destroy the living. They were a final test of character for those left behind. The Queen had not written them to crown a favorite. She had written them to protect the emotional truth of the monarchy. Catherine understood that now. William understood it too. The future king had confirmed her place, but the Queen had defined its meaning. Camilla remained wounded, but not destroyed. The Queen consort had lost access, and that exclusion would follow her through every quiet room and every careful conversation. Yet her pain carried a lesson the palace could no longer ignore. Proximity to the throne was not the same as private trust. Camilla had rank, she had presence, she had history beside the king. But the Queen's final confidence had moved somewhere else, and Catherine now carried what title alone could never command. Charles knew the monarchy had changed. The king had watched a private decision become a public symbol, and he understood that Catherine now held a moral authority no ceremony could grant, and no resentment could take away. Moral authority, in plain terms, is the quiet power people give to someone they believe has earned trust through character. Catherine had earned it not by demanding the letters, but by being trusted to protect them without revenge. The verdict was clear. The crown's future would not be protected by noise, entitlement, or anger. It would be protected by the person willing to carry silence with dignity. The palace had been shaken, Camilla had been hurt, Charles had been tested, and William had been forced to stand firm. But the Queen's final choice stood. Catherine walked forward, as the sole keeper of a legacy no one else could claim. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.